近一個世紀前，宋耀興在1924年出生於中國廣東省水溪村。在那個時代和傳統文化，她這樣的女孩並沒有太多前景和自由。那時少女的人生劇本是簡單而死板的，做女孩時服侍父母和長輩，何時及與誰結婚是由家人決定，撫養孩子必須盡力而為，就做到最後一口氣也不能放棄。90多年歲月，儘管戰爭、革命和其他障礙，例如缺乏高等教育或資源匱乏，還與父母、丈夫和孩子長期分離，她都盡職盡責地遵守劇本。奇蹟般地，在這加拿大西南區，終於與父母和弟妹團聚。還當步入黃金歲月時，看到所有孩子、孫子和曾孫們長大成人，結婚生子。他現在終於安息了，周圍身邊有那麼多親朋戚友啊！這是宋耀興的人生故事，由他最小的孩子記得的那樣。
My mom didn't talk much about her childhood, so I'm not too certain, but those years appeared stable and happy. Life etched with hardships began around the time the Japanese marched into Guangdong in the late 1930s. Her family fled to Macau for a period, and upon returning at age 17 she married my dad and gave birth to my big sister Carolina a year later, in 1942. Often Mom recounted how little rice was being rationed, and how she would give her share to her baby girl, while subsisting on watery congee and few leaves of greens herself. Undoubtedly that experience burnt into her being to never waste any food, however spoiled it may be. After the war, 2 more daughters were born, Marcia in 1945 and Vicky in 1949, which was after the start of the Chinese Civil War. That political upheaval forced Dad to flee to Hong Kong, so he never met Vicky until much later. As the revolution took hold, and land became nationalized, Mom was forced to leave her young girls and elderly in-laws behind, and ventured out of the village to earn what she could to keep the family fed. She ended up in Guangzhou as caretaker for a professor's family, as well as washing and ironing for others trying to make ends meet. She would send every cent she earned back home, but over time, she would end up selling off what little dowry she had to supplement the shortfalls. During those desperate times, she recounted often, she would hide in the rooftop and cried herself to sleep.
不管多麼不可能，她一直堅持下去，直到1955年她自己到香港與我爸團聚，留下了3個女兒在村。1956年我哥克凡出生，1957年農曆新年媽帶她回到我們村，然後他們把我3姐帶到了香港，並在7歲時第一次見到了她的父親。那年夏天，我2姐也離村到香港與家人團聚，只有大家姐留在中國上學，直到1962年先得出香港，但不久後她就與 Carlos 結婚並移居尼加拉瓜。來港後的早幾年，由於我爸當時的健康問題及我媽在那英籍地缺乏英語或現代技能，她的貧困生活沒有改善。幸運的是，艱難的環境並沒有阻止她在1959年意外生下最後一個孩子，我只能想像在那一刻決定再增加一張吃飯嘴巴一定是不容易的選擇。難怪我最喜歡的一句話是幸運勝於能力。
Admittedly biased and unreliable, my earliest memory of her was that of a happy mother, spending precious moments laughing while coddling me. During those times she would call me by several endearing nicknames, but in village dialect, so the meaning of which I was never quite certain. It would have been a nice fairy tale had I been the lucky charm that turned everything around, but alas, her struggles continued. Those brief happy moments quickly became fewer and farther in between as the drudgery of survival in the big city wore on. I recall her working long hours, often 7 days a week as a sweatshop seamstress. It didn't help that my brother and I were closer to Dad than Mom emotionally. Her salvation came in the form of spirituality in Buddhism, which ironically caused her to be further isolated from us. Dad favored modern thinking, and we children of course would much prefer the movies and amusement park with him than to pray at the temples with her. The only fond memory of temple visits was an overnight family retreat at the monastery on Lantau Island. Dennis and I otherwise hated having to accompany her to the weekly evening rituals at various places of worship that went on all during the late 60s. Two other events of significance in this time period: first, my second sister Marcia marrying Henry, and moved to Nicaragua where Carolina and family were. The other was my mom's sister and husband, Auntie Ethel, and Uncle Tim determined effort to sponsor our family to immigrate to Canada. Without their sponsorship and financial help, our family would have never got the fresh start that we desperately needed at that time. My mom was never tired of reminding us that we owe much of the comfort and success we enjoyed for the past 50 years to our generous aunt and uncle.
我媽於1972年6月帶着我們一家5口，她、爸、琪姐、哥和我，來到維多利亞。1年之內，大家姐和2家姐的家庭也移民加拿大，定居也在 Victoria。在她愛家人的支持下，媽媽的生活變得穩定和愉快。但為了提供我哥和我有更美好未來，從而迫使我爸媽離開 Victoria 舒適的環境。從73到79年，爸爸接管在 New West 的 Columbia Produce， 而媽媽在任車衣，這次在 Jansen 工廠。與此同時，我三姐 Vicky 留在了維多利亞，並於1973年與 Tony 結婚。在亞熱帶長大及缺乏保暖體質的媽來說，冬季的幾個月裏乘坐清晨巴士往溫哥華肯定難以忍受的。於1979年賣掉了 New West 的雜貨店後，他們去第一個正式假期，到夏威夷度假7天。他們然後搬回溫哥華島，接管大家姐和二哥的傾華 Groceries 同定居在 Sydney。那時媽慢慢地變得精通英語會話。
How are you? Players regular. Okay, 250 please. Thank you. Bye.
除了分擔收銀職責，他還確保他所有的孫子都能說基本廣東話。
食飯，飽飽，點蟲蟲，蟲蟲飛 ，all dum dum。
Mom and Dad finally retired in the mid-1980s and built their dream home on Panorama Drive in Victoria. In her leisure, she tended to her vegetable garden, always weary of food insecurity, and learned to enjoy playing mahjong. Truth be told, she was never very good at it as it was not her nature to care about winning, especially from family and friends. I think she had the most fun when she caught herself making silly mistakes, like forgetting to pick a flower or sick jar woo. Her spontaneous laughter at those moments is what I will miss most. In the early 90s, around the time Dennis and Isadora's first daughter Vanessa was born, Mom and Dad moved back to Vancouver to help care for their newest granddaughter. They soon sold their house on Panorama Drive to Vicky and Tony, and moved into the house in which she and Dad lived until their final years. While Dad was with us, the two would explore the cities on local buses, as well as traveled fair a bit, visiting many parts of Canada, US, and Asia. They even took a few trips back to our village where they lived for a few months in our ancestral home they rebuilt. Mom never said anything to me, but I wonder how bittersweet it was for her to be back in the surroundings that brought her so much trauma. After Dad died in 2001, Mom remained reasonably healthy for a number of years. She kept up with daily Luk Ton Kwan practice, breathing, and eye exercises, which she eagerly tried to teach her grandchildren whenever they're within earshot. Dennis and my families, along with Vicky, accompanied her to visit our village and paid her respect to our ancestors one last time in 2007. That was the last overseas big trip for her. As she matched towards her 90s, she struggled with issues of circulation in her legs and began losing her mobility. My family took our last trip with her, together with Dennis' family in 2013, cruising to Alaska. Thereafter, Dennis and my sisters would take Mom to shorter cruises where walking was kept to a minimum, the last in 2018 to San Fran. As her physical conditions worsened, she was more and more homebounded. The burden of caring for her fell heavily on the shoulders of Dennis and his family. My sisters and I tried to lessen his load by having Mom stay with us occasionally, but I know I could have done more. My sisters and I are truly grateful that Mom have been so well cared for, and rather than at a senior facility, got to live at home with Dennis' family until her final days.
在2011年放棄純素食主義後，媽媽開始成為一個美食家，尤其喜歡我自製的披薩和愛殼薯餅。在 Victoria 期間，她最喜歡去的地方是金城，她有時會一天3餐都在那裡吃。但即使她行動不便，她也總是在家庭慶祝活動時充滿活力，無論是婚禮、畢業、新生兒還是生日。隨着不斷增長的家譜，每年都有越來越多這個類型慶祝。然而，2020年的 Covid 疫情讓這些慶祝戛然而止，我感覺他的身體和精神都在不斷減落。我和兄姐還注意到媽的美食熱情也逐漸消失了。幸運的是，幾週前我們有機會與他和許久未見的兒孫一起慶祝他的98歲生日。
In closing, it's fair to say Mom had as tough of a start in life as anyone I know. I can't imagine the willpower it took to fight through the obstacle after obstacle life threw at her. She accepted the responsibilities, fairly or unfairly laid upon her, and soldiered on, never giving up. Her will and tenacity to overcome are qualities that we all would do well to emulate. With the turmoil of her first few decades behind her, she found joy and happiness in the latter half of her life. I must also confess and apologize to my mom for being quick to dismiss her thinking as being too traditional and old-fashioned, and for being annoyed at her instinctive aversion of risks, fearing for the worst rather than embracing the opportunity. I recognize now the origin of her fear, given her early life experiences. Ironically, the reason I don't share my mom's conservative views is in large part owed to her hard work, steadfastly providing a stable and nourishing environment in which I can realize my potentials. I succeeded because she succeeded. My achievement is very much her achievement. To varying extents, the same can be said of all who belong to her family tree, which includes, according to my spreadsheet, 3 daughters and 2 sons, 3 sons-in-law, 2 daughters-in-law, 8 granddaughters, 4 grandsons, 3 granddaughters-in-law, 4 grandson-in-laws, 8 great-granddaughters, and 5 great-grandsons. I hope she was, and is, proud of all of us. May she never stop smiling upon us from above, with Dad by her side.